She didn't even look at me when she said it. She was scrolling, thumb flicking across the screen like my existence was just another notification she could swipe away. "No one would notice if you left," she muttered, a lazy little smirk curling her lips. The air in the kitchen went heavy. The smell of burnt toast and cold coffee made my stomach turn. She didn't see the way my hands stopped moving, the way my eyes fixed on her reflection in the microwave door. She didn't see anything at all. For years, I had been the invisible man at this table, providing, repairing, apologizing for things I didn't even do, while she sharpened her jokes on me like knives. But this one landed differently. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a dare. I didn't argue. I didn't slam my fist on the table or shout back. I just let the words hang there, then nodded once. That was it. That one small nod was the only warning she'd ever get, though she didn't know it yet. I finished my coffee in silence, rinsed the mug, and wiped the counter. She went back to her phone, thinking she'd won some pointless skirmish. She didn't know the war had already ended. Months ago, on paper, in places she never even thought to look. That night, the house was too quiet. I scrubbed the last pan clean, took the trash out, and left my phone on the counter next to her stack of unopened mail. My keys, too. She liked to accuse me of being secretive, of hiding things. She'd never guess that all the hiding was finished. The drawers I had emptied over weeks looked normal at a glance, but if she looked closer, she'd see what was missing. Not just my clothes, but the spare hard drives, the sealed envelopes, the things she'd mocked as nerd clutter. She wouldn't notice tonight, maybe not even tomorrow, but she would. The backpack by the door was heavy, not with clothes or a goodbye note, but with something colder, denser. One single item. I placed it there deliberately like a loaded trap disguised as a gift. It sat upright, zipper facing out, waiting. She stepped over it when she got home, kicked off her shoes, and muttered about traffic. Didn't even glance inside. Just tossed her coat on the chair and scrolled her phone again. And as I walked out that door, quiet as a ghost, I thought of all the men who'd sat at tables like mine, being erased one sarcastic remark at a time. If you're one of them reading this, you already know the tone she used. The way it drains you, not all at once, but in drops. That's why I'm telling you this. Because over 97% of the people listening to stories like mine never hit subscribe, never tap follow, and honestly, that little action is what keeps this team going, what makes it possible for us to keep exposing the things people think they can get away with. If this resonates, consider it your quiet nod back to us. I didn't drive off in a rage. I didn't plan some Hollywood escape. I simply slipped into the driver's seat, turned the key, and left. The roads were empty. The hum of the engine was softer than I'd imagined. No one called. No one texted. Not even her. By the time she noticed, I would be beyond the city limits. My name already erased from accounts she thought were joint. My signature already vanished from papers she never read. She thought she'd cut me down with a line at breakfast, but all she really did was confirm my timing. When she finally did look at the backpack, it would be too late. She'd open it and see a life she never believed I had. The plans, the signatures, the silent transfer of everything she thought was hers. But tonight, it was just a bag by the door and an empty chair at the table. She'd walk past it, thinking she still had the upper hand, thinking the world still revolved around her. But in that moment, everything she owned, everything she counted on, had already shifted. She just didn't know yet. And me? I wasn't running. I wasn't even hiding. I was just gone. Exactly the way she told me to be. The first morning, she wasn't even curious. She stretched across the whole bed like a cat, probably thinking I'd sulked off to the garage again. That's what I usually did, right? Go out to the shed, pretend to fix something, slam a wrench around until I'd swallowed whatever insult she'd tossed like confetti the night before. She poured herself coffee. My mug was still there, clean. She didn't notice. She thought I was doing what I always did, disappearing just enough to make her feel like she won. By noon, she walked out to the garage to gloat. I wasn't there. No smell of motor oil, no dusty work gloves tossed on the bench. Just a swept floor and one empty hook where the big red toolbox used to hang. Still no alarm bells. She probably figured I went into town or needed space. The irony is thick enough to chew. She didn't notice the absence of shoes by the back door. Or maybe she noticed and just told herself she didn't care. She definitely didn't clock the missing shaving kit, the chargers, or the bag of documents that used to live at the bottom of the filing cabinet. What she did notice was the silence. And silence, for people like her, isn't peaceful. It's accusatory. The house wasn't echoing with sulking footsteps or annoyed muttering. It was just quiet. Too quiet for someone she claimed to know so well. The second morning, she called my phone. Once. No voicemail. It rang and rang until it didn't. Then she checked the security app on her phone, only to realize I'd disabled her access the night before. Password changed. Account reassigned. The camera feed showed her face reflected in the dark screen of her phone. For someone who used to roll her eyes every time I mentioned two-factor authentication, it must have felt like black magic. Still, she waited. Pride wouldn't let her admit anything was wrong. She texted my brother on the second night, finally. "Hey, is your hermit of a sibling hiding out over there?" She wrote, trying to sound casual. He didn't reply with a joke. Just said, "Haven't heard from him in weeks." Weeks. That word must have landed in her stomach like a stone. She walked the house, suddenly seeing things as if for the first time. The absence was no longer a mood, it was spatial. One drawer in the dresser completely empty. Some of the books missing from the office shelf. The spare car key gone. A faint line of dust on the shelf where my old watch box used to be. Gone. Then the panic hit. She opened the banking app and saw the main account drained. Not zeroed out in a rush, but methodically. Transfers logged over the past 6 months. Small ones, then larger ones. The savings account she never checked? Closed. The vacation fund that sat dormant for 3 years? Emptied and deactivated. A few investment portfolios she never asked about? No longer associated with either of our names. She refreshed. Then refreshed again. Logged out. Logged back in. Nothing changed. The numbers stayed flatlined. Her hands were trembling now. She tried calling the bank. The man on the phone confirmed her identity, asked her a few questions, and then gently said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. This account was legally converted to an individual holding under revised access protocols." She didn't even understand what that meant. She sat at the kitchen table, now aware of the stillness in a way she hadn't been before. The TV was off. The radio quiet. There was no humming from the garage. No clink of a spoon in a mug. No off-key whistling from the bathroom. Nothing to yell at. Nothing to roll her eyes about. Nothing to belittle. She got up and stood in front of the backpack. Still unopened. She stared at it like it might hiss or explode. Her breath caught in her throat. Suddenly, it didn't look like a forgotten bag anymore. It looked planted. Deliberate. Heavy. Unmoving. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, she opened the coat closet and saw that my winter gear was missing. The backup keys gone from the hook inside. My favorite flannel jacket, the one she accidentally shrunk last year, not there either. A cold sweat crawled up her spine. Upstairs, she pulled open every drawer, scanning for signs of presence. No socks, no cologne, no charger cords, no watch stand, no spare glasses. The bathroom drawer? All hers now. Mine had been wiped clean like a crime scene. Not chaotic. Clean. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a dramatic exit with shouting and tears. It was a subtraction. And the math was starting to terrify her. By the end of day 2, she called her lawyer. Left a voicemail she tried to keep calm. Just a little situation. Not urgent. But, "Please call me back." She hung up. Then, finally, reluctantly, sat down in front of the backpack again. This time, her hand hovered near the zipper. Still, she didn't open it. Because some part of her already knew. I hadn't just left. I had prepared. On the third morning, she cracked. There's only so long you can circle something before it starts to rot in your mind. She'd spent 2 full days pretending the backpack wasn't there. Stepping around it like it was part of the furniture. But it wasn't. It was the only object in the house that seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. It didn't beep. It didn't move. It didn't whisper. And yet somehow it loomed. By the time she finally sat down in front of it, the sun had barely risen. Her hair was unbrushed. The oversized sweatshirt she wore was mine. One of the few things I left behind, and not by accident. The sleeves swallowed her hands. She tugged at them like a child. Then slowly, deliberately, unzipped the backpack. The sound alone made her flinch. Inside, there wasn't much, just one large, black binder. Zippered. Clean. Labeled in my handwriting, "Contingency, do not shred." She opened it. First page. A table of contents, organized with section titles and timestamps. Her eyes scanned quickly. Trust transfer / cabin, property 02, LLC reallocation, spousal business partnership, exit trigger clause, digital asset split, timeline drafts, redacted, and the one that made her heart stop, finalized actions as of 180 days post-trigger. Second page, a notarized property transfer document. Photocopy not original. Names redacted with thick black ink except hers. Her name was untouched, highlighted, in fact. A neon strip of yellow streaked through it like a flare. She turned the page. Then another. Legalese bled across the sheets. Clauses she didn't understand. Terms she'd never read. Words like divested, retained interest, irrevocable, execution window expired. The dates. That's what hit her next. Dates she didn't recognize because they weren't hers. They were mine. Meetings, signatures, filings, all lined up like chess pieces. She kept flipping. Halfway through, a stapled packet. A list of entities registered in the last 2 years. Some names sounded familiar. Our vacation cabin. Our so-called joint small business. Others were strange. Obscure LLCs, numbered trusts. But under each one was a footnote. Transfer complete. Date. Followed by a 3-letter code I'd used in every draft I wrote over the years. And then the handwritten section. It wasn't neat. It was dense. Like a storm had passed through my pen. Yellow legal pad paper, scrawled timelines, crossed out contingency plans, notations like, too obvious, risk of backlash, check with Alan, Q1 meeting. One page was labeled, timeline, cover. A column of events matched side by side with her calendar. Her girl's weekend in Napa, matched to a cabin refinance filing. Her cousin's wedding. I'd filed an exit clause for our business partnership that day. Her emergency weekend trip to Scottsdale. That's when the transfer of her car's lease was executed. She flipped back and forth, scanning in disbelief. My plans weren't emotional, they were surgical. Every action taken under her nose. Every smile I wore for the last 18 months. A decoy. And then she found it. A sheet with just one line, centered, written in sharp black ink. You said no one would notice. You were half right. Tucked beneath that page was a business card. Matte black, raised lettering. Nothing fancy. Richard A. Levinson. Asset and Domestic Reallocation Strategy. Levinson Cray LLP. Direct line underlined twice. No note. No dramatic monologue. Just that. She closed the binder slowly, as if afraid it would bite her. The silence in the house seemed deeper now, stretched too thin. She stood up unsteadily and looked around, as if expecting the furniture to laugh at her. The house was still hers, but now, for the first time, she wondered how much of that was legally true. She paced, then grabbed her phone and typed in the number from the card. Disconnected. She tried again. Same result. She tried Googling the firm. A sleek site came up, but no contact info. Only a generic inquiry form and a press page that listed their top clients. Mostly corporate dissolutions and complex dissolutions of joint holdings. Her name wasn't there, but mine was. In the background of a photo at a ribbon-cutting ceremony 2 towns over. I wasn't the star, just a face in the crowd. Smiling. The room tilted. She went back to the kitchen, opened the fridge, stared at a bottle of orange juice for a full minute, then closed it again. She needed to sit, but she couldn't. Needed to think, but her brain kept skipping like a scratched record. The binder was back on the table, perfectly centered. She hadn't lost a husband. She hadn't been abandoned. This wasn't some dramatic flare of emotion, a tantrum, or a cry for attention. This was premeditated. Every inch of her world had been quietly audited, disassembled, and put back together without her name on the final draft. The backpack wasn't a clue. It was a closing statement. She didn't make the appointment through his assistant. She just walked into his office holding the binder like it was a bomb with the pin halfway out. Her attorney, Michael Doran, had represented her family since before she got married. He'd handled her parents' estate, the prenup she insisted on, just to be safe, and even the paperwork for her boutique's LLC, back when she thought being a business owner meant sitting behind velvet curtains sipping espresso and micromanaging Instagram filters. Michael was in his early 60s, sharp as ever, but something in his posture shifted the second she laid the binder on his desk. It made a dull thump. That sound filled the space between them like thunder. "I need you to look at this. Now," she said. Her voice clipped, no longer confident, just brittle. He opened it, adjusted his glasses and started flipping through. At first, his expression was unreadable. Then the frown set in. Then the eyebrows rose. Then, without looking up, he murmured, "Where did you get this?" "My husband left it," she said. "3 days ago. I haven't heard from him since." Michael stopped on a notarized signature. "This isn't a draft," he said, tapping the page. "This is executed. Recorded. Dated over 6 months ago." He flipped again. "This trust? It's real. I've heard of the firm that set this up. They don't touch anything under 7 figures." Her breath hitched. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "your husband wasn't tinkering in the garage with broken appliances. He was dissolving joint assets and restructuring ownership with professional guidance. Quietly, legally, and effectively." He paused, set the binder down, and looked up at her. Really looked. "Did you know about any of this?" She blinked, felt heat rising to her face. "Of course not. I would've. He didn't. He was always so quiet. I thought he was just being dramatic, withdrawing." Michael leaned back, rubbed his chin. "You thought he was withdrawing," he repeated. "And it never occurred to you to ask what he was doing with his time? Who he was meeting with?" She scoffed. "He barely left the house. Every time I saw him, he was just reading some article or fiddling with his computer. He didn't say anything." "No," Michael said calmly. "He didn't. And that's exactly how he got this far." He gestured toward the binder again. "These aren't plans. These are milestones. You're not looking at strategy, you're looking at results. Some of this," he flipped to a section tagged with a yellow sticky note, "dates back over a year. A trust funded through quarterly transfers, each under the IRS reporting threshold. A business reassignment filed the same week your store rebranded. The land parcel transfer under the cabin? That was filed through a holding company he created, just long enough to move the deed, then dissolved. Clean. No paper trail unless you know what you're looking for." She sank into the chair. "And this," he said, lifting a thin sheet with a blue stamp on the bottom corner. "This clause. This is what I'd call a kill switch, a pre-agreed exit based on a defined condition. And guess what that condition was?" She didn't answer. Michael read aloud. "Sustained absence of spousal engagement and shared decision-making for a period exceeding 180 days. Legally vague, but cleverly argued." She shook her head. "That's ridiculous. You can't just leave someone based on silence." He closed the binder gently. "You can if the silence is measurable. Text logs, calendar entries, unopened emails, voice recordings. If he's been documenting that you haven't engaged in joint planning, haven't responded to certain prompts, yes, it can stand up in arbitration. Especially if he structured all of this as non-contentious." She bristled. "Non-contentious? This is insane. He blindsided me." "No," Michael said softly. "He didn't. He executed a long-term exit strategy. Clean. Without provocation. That's not insanity. That's discipline." Her fists clenched in her lap. "Then why come to you? What do we do now?" He hesitated. "Well, for starters, we try to contact his counsel. But I wouldn't expect a reply soon. If I were in his shoes, I'd make sure all points of communication had cooling-off periods. Legally enforced silence." She was shaking now. "You're telling me this is over?" "I'm telling you," he said carefully, "that this is done. What he left you wasn't a threat. It was a record. And now, the consequences." She stood, knocking the chair back. "This can't be happening. I trusted him. I gave him freedom. I supported his little hobbies." Michael's face didn't change. "Did you ask what those hobbies were?" She paused. That familiar heat of defensiveness twisted into something worse. Doubt. Memory. All the nights she called his work pointless. All the dinners where she scrolled through her phone as he tried to talk. All the weekends she spent networking while he stayed home to balance the books. Michael's voice broke through her spiral, quiet but clear. "He asked you to look. You didn't. He asked you to care. You didn't. So he planned. You didn't see it because you never thought he could. That's not on him." She turned without replying, grabbing the binder and marching toward the door. But as she reached for the handle, he said one final thing. Call me when you're ready to understand what he left out of that binder. She froze for a moment, just one, then walked out without a word. She stormed home from Michael's office like she was going to burn the walls down with righteous fury. The binder thudded onto the kitchen counter again. But this time, she didn't open it. It sat there like a silent executioner. She thought maybe if she could just find one thing, just one hole in the story, she could breathe again. So she started where it hurt most, her car. She marched out to the garage, heels still clicking like war drums, and opened the glove box. The lease paperwork was there, tucked neatly in its sleeve. She pulled it out, scanned the front page, and stopped cold. Lassie, Windmill Haven Holdings, LLC. She blinked, looked again. Not her name, not even our names. An LLC. She didn't recognize it. Never heard of it. She texted Michael a photo. Less than a minute later, he responded, "That's one of the entities from the binder. It's real. Filed last March. He's listed as managing member. You're not on it." She threw the folder across the garage. It slapped the concrete and slid to a stop beside an old box of Christmas lights he'd asked her to help untangle 5 years ago. She never had. The rage was already curdling. She bolted back inside, turned on her laptop, and pulled up the deed records for the cabin. Her family's pride and joy, the place she used to brag, was finally under her name. The screen loaded. Slowly. Then, parcel owner, Crestwood Timber Assets Trust. The hell? She searched it. Same signature. Same notary date. Different owner. The land under the cabin had been severed from the property in a quiet title action. Filed months ago. The cabin itself? Technically still under her name, but she didn't own the land it sat on. Which meant she owned nothing but a glorified shed on someone else's dirt. And the trust? Listed an independent administrator. But the listed strategic consultant? Her husband. He didn't even bother hiding it. Just tucked it all behind jargon and paperwork she'd never look at. Because she never had. She could feel it unraveling now. Like the sweater of her life had been snagged without her noticing. And she kept walking while the threads disintegrated behind her. Then came the real punch. Her business. Her baby. She opened the Secretary of State site and looked up the filing for her boutique. It was gone. Not dissolved, absorbed. Merged into a new entity 2 months ago under a parent company she had never heard of, Juniper and Ash Collective. A quick search turned up a sleek, minimalistic brand site. A refined retail experience reimagined. Her old boutique photos were still there, but cleaner, edited. She wasn't mentioned anywhere. But there was a page listing the Strategic Advisory Board. At the bottom, in small print, was his name. She called Michael. "Tell me this is a mistake," she snapped. He sighed. "I wish it were. The original LLC you filed?" He was listed as a silent partner. Probably handled setup, finances, back end. That gave him leverage, especially if you never updated the operating agreement. "You're telling me he took my business?" "No," he said gently. "You gave it to him. You just didn't notice." She nearly threw the phone. Instead, she marched into the living room, yanked open the drawer where they kept shared documents, and began tearing through files. Every envelope, every tax return, every agreement she'd signed without reading. Page after page, year after year. Little notes in his handwriting. Clauses highlighted. Signatures she recognized but never remembered placing. In her head, she was screaming. But out loud, she said nothing. She sat there for what must have been an hour, surrounded by the physical evidence of a life she'd always assumed was under her control. He hadn't hidden anything. He'd just counted on one fatal truth. She'd never cared enough to ask. And now, when she finally wanted answers, there was silence. Michael tried calling his legal team. No response. Voicemail full. She emailed. Bounced back. She tried reaching out to a friend who used to know one of his former clients. "Sorry," came the reply. "He signed NDAs. Won't talk. Can't." Even her friends were starting to go quiet. She posted a vague status online. Something about betrayal, liars, how men always walk away. 2 likes. No comments. Her world, once so neatly arranged around her opinions, was shrinking like a cold tide pulling back from the shore. The house suddenly felt larger. Not emptier, colder. Like it no longer belonged to her. Like she was trespassing in her own curated life. And the backpack still sat there. Closed now, but somehow louder than before. This wasn't a disappearance. This was a rewriting. And she wasn't the one holding the pen. She didn't sleep. Not that night. Maybe not the one before either. Everything in the house had shifted, even the light felt different. Cold, fluorescent, surgical. She kept pacing the hallway, barefoot, her hands shaking not from sadness, but something worse. Disorientation. Like waking up in a house you thought you built, only to find out none of the bricks were yours. Around 2 a.m., she sat down and opened her contacts. Eli Kramer. God, she used to mock that guy so hard. Always came to barbecues in button-downs tucked too tightly into discount khakis, talked about warehouse logistics like it was the Manhattan Project. Her nickname for him was Spreadsheets and Sadness. She called him anyway. He picked up after 2 rings. Sounded wide awake. "Hey Eli, it's Melissa," she said, trying to sound upbeat. Casual. Normal. It didn't land. A pause. Then, "Melissa. Wow, it's been a while." She didn't even know where to start, so she just threw the question out. Have you talked to him lately?" Another pause. Yeah, not recently, but we talk now and then." "You do?" she asked, eyebrows twitching. "I didn't think you two were that close anymore." "Oh, he helped me restructure the company. Brought in a tax consultant I'd never even heard of. Cleaned up our reporting, optimized our supplier contracts. He's the reason we're still afloat, honestly." "Let me guess." Eli chuckled. "He finally took that sabbatical he kept joking about." She blinked. "Sabbatical?" "Yeah, he called it his realignment phase. Said he had some personal logistics to reorganize. Man always speaks in metaphors." He laughed like it was a charming quirk. "Told me to call if I ever need help again. Sharp guy." She hung up before she said something stupid. 5 minutes later, she called Nathan Tilley, another old name. Her husband's former coworker from that marketing job he held for 3 miserable years. Nathan used to come over for beers, always complaining about the grind. Melissa had pegged him as a lifer, one of those guys who coast on charm and never deliver. She barely remembered the last time she saw him. Nathan picked up immediately. "Melissa? Hey there." His voice was too cheerful. She gritted her teeth. "I was wondering, have you seen or spoken to him recently?" Nathan didn't hesitate. "Oh yeah, actually he helped me close a deal just last quarter. Real estate pivot. Said I needed to quit chasing quick wins and start building cash flow assets. Put me in touch with a client of his who wanted to unload a block of rental units. I flipped half, held the rest. It's been a game changer." Her mouth went dry. "I didn't know you two kept in touch." "Oh, we didn't. Not for a while. Then out of nowhere he called. Said he'd been working on something new, helping guys like us reposition our lives. I thought it was a sales pitch at first. Turns out he just wanted to help. Said something about building his own quiet circle." She barely made it to the end of the call. Quiet circle. The words echoed like a riddle. She scrolled through her phone, opening old message threads. Birthday group chats. Casual hangouts. Old poker night lists. Half of them were still active, but she hadn't been invited in months. She used to roll her eyes when he went to networking mixers at those dimly lit pubs in the city. Said they were just sad men drinking overpriced whiskey and pretending they had a plan. She remembered her exact words once. "You think a bunch of middle-aged guys swapping business cards is going to build anything real?" Apparently, yes, they did. And they had. She opened Facebook. Checked Eli's profile. There he was, posing in front of a shipping warehouse with a bright new logo behind him. Nathan's page? A photo of him holding a giant novelty key in front of a row of refurbished rental units. Grinning like a man who just won the lottery. And her husband? Absent. Not tagged. Not mentioned. Invisible. Yet everywhere. She switched to LinkedIn. Searched his name. No result. But under Nathan's profile in his skills endorsed section, there it was. Strategic operations. Recommended by Anonymous. Anonymous. But she knew that handwriting. She got up, walked over to the binder still sitting on the counter, flipped open to the networking log. Yes, he'd kept a log, and read the names listed in the margins. Not just Eli. Not just Nathan. Bryce. Keith. Jamal. Stewart. Men she'd thought were just his friends. Quiet. Steady. Forgettable. She had laughed at them. To their faces, sometimes. And now they were something else. Organized. Stable. Growing. She pulled open the drawer where they kept their tax returns and found a sticky note on an old folder. Build quietly. Build strong. She didn't know if he meant the network or himself. Both probably. And now, she was on the outside looking in. All that time she thought he was disappearing? He was, just not the way she imagined. He hadn't vanished. He'd risen. The address wasn't on any mail he'd ever received at home. It wasn't saved in his phone, and it sure as hell wasn't in the old emergency contact forms she'd lazily filled out on his behalf, back when she still pretended to be involved. It came from a name scrawled in the back of the binder, next to a logo she half recognized, one of those boutique finance firms with minimalist websites and maximum secrecy. No team photos. No about us. Just a phone number, a single email, and a physical address tucked into the old warehouse district just outside the city. She didn't call. She wanted to see for herself. It was raining when she got there, naturally. Not the dramatic thunderstorm kind. Just a steady, irritating drizzle that soaked through her blouse and made her heels stick to the sidewalk. She stood across the street first, staring up at the building like it might reject her on sight. It was modern but understated steel and glass brush signage, expensive in the way only the unbranded can be. Inside, everything was silent, slick, and antiseptic. A receptionist in a gray blazer sat behind a curved marble desk, typing something on a monitor that faced away from visitors. She didn't look up when the door opened. Just said, flatly, "Welcome to Harlandwell's Strategic. Name and appointment. I'm looking for my husband." Now the woman looked up. Neutral face. Not hostile, not warm. Just unmoved. Name. She gave it. A pause. Click-click of the keyboard. "He doesn't work here in the traditional sense," the woman said finally. "He's more of a strategic advisor. We don't schedule meetings with him directly. His engagements are typically prearranged through client counsel." Client, counsel, engagements. "Is he in today?" she asked, trying not to sound too sharp. The woman checked something again. "No. He's traveling for the next 2 weeks. Do you know where?" "I don't," the receptionist replied, perfectly calm. "Even if I did, that information wouldn't be available to non-clients." Melissa's fingers twitched against her purse. "I'm his wife." The receptionist's expression didn't change. "According to our file, that's not applicable." It was said gently, pity without emotion. She felt the blood drain from her face. "Not applicable. I can take a message if you like," the woman continued. "Or let him know you stopped by." She almost said yes. Almost asked her to please. "Please, just tell him I came. Just pass along my name, just say I need to speak to him." But she didn't, because something in the woman's tone made it very clear. This wasn't the first time someone had shown up hoping to skip the line. And her husband had already removed her from the guest list. "No," she said, her voice hoarse. "No message." She turned to leave. The woman went back to typing before the glass door even shut behind her. Outside, the rain was colder. Her reflection in the tinted windows looked older, smaller. It hit her then, not like a slap but like a slow, suffocating compression. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't dodging confrontation. He'd just outgrown it. She'd imagined this moment for days. The dramatic face-off, the raw emotional monologue, the satisfying blame shift. Maybe she'd cry. Maybe he'd soften. Maybe they'd have some heated argument in a quiet corner where he'd finally admit this had all gone too far. But she didn't get that. She didn't get anything. No hallway. No eye contact. No voice. She wasn't chasing a man. She was chasing a ghost that had outpaced her by at least 18 months. And the worst part? He'd left the door open. The receptionist didn't say she couldn't leave a message. She just asked, "Should I?" And Melissa couldn't even bring herself to say yes. Because deep down, some part of her already knew the truth. Even if the message got to him, he wouldn't reply. He didn't need to. She was no longer someone whose voice triggered movement in his world. She was just an old address in his life. And he'd already changed the locks. She didn't drive home after the non-confrontation at Harlandwell's. She drove to her boutique. Or, rather, what used to be her boutique. The new sign gleamed above the door. Clean, stylish, sterile. Someone had power washed her name off the window. The scent inside was unfamiliar. The same furniture but rearranged. The same walls but colder now. Her office was technically still in the back. No one had bothered to move her things, but it felt like trespassing. She told the girl at the counter she was just grabbing something, and didn't wait for permission. She shut the door behind her and leaned against it like something was chasing her. She had no plan. No grand revelation waiting to strike. All she had was a gut-level instinct that something else was hiding in plain sight. She flicked on her laptop. Took longer than usual to boot. The screensaver was still a picture of her and him. Taken 3 years ago at a pumpkin patch, her grinning and leaning into him, his expression distant, like he already knew. She stared at it longer than she meant to. Then she opened her email. The archive stretched back over a decade. Thousands of messages. Contracts, invoices, promo codes. Junk. She searched for his name. Hundreds of results. Most irrelevant. But buried deep, dated over 15 months ago, was one forwarded from his old email account. Subject: for signature, contingency draft. Attachment: spousal buyout agreement, contingency trigger.pdf. She hadn't opened it. The preview showed it as read. Of course it did. She'd probably tapped it once while scrolling in line at a coffee shop and then forgotten it existed. She clicked on it now, hands slick with sweat. The document loaded slowly. At the top, the firm's name, Levinson Cray LLP. Underneath, draft executed in anticipation of mutual disengagement or sustained emotional detachment. She blinked. Was that even legal language? She scrolled. Her name and his were both listed. It looked legitimate. Hell, it was legitimate. Digitally signed by him. And by her. Wait, she checked the signature. It was hers. DocuSigned. Timestamped. Verified by IP address. She felt sick. He'd sent it when she was at her mother's, the weekend she got food poisoning, and asked him to handle anything urgent. She remembered now. He texted, "Got an email for you to sign. Some tax thing. Just click it so I can finish filing." She'd clicked it while watching reruns on the couch, half asleep and still nauseous. And just like that, she'd signed away half her life. She kept reading. Clause 4.1. Contingency activation defined trigger. In the event of no documented evidence of mutual planning, shared goal setting, or verbal check-ins initiated by Party B for a period exceeding 180 consecutive days, this agreement shall become irrevocable. Party B was her. He'd even included a sample list of engagement indicators, at the end things like mutual vacation planning, holiday coordination, financial planning meetings, and intentional check-ins, each one cross-referenced with dates. She had done none of it. Not a single one. She searched her calendar in disbelief. Those months were filled with social events, brunches, yoga retreats, 2 girls' weekends, and a marketing conference in Atlanta. Not one item listed with his name on it. Not even an anniversary dinner. Her mouth went dry. He had built an airtight case out of her absence. He hadn't punished her. He just recorded her. And now the agreement had passed the 180-day trigger. Meaning every clause, every transfer, every exclusion was locked. She scrolled to the final page. Executed, yes. Irrevocable as of 180 days post-trigger. Counterparty contact nullified under Clause 7.2 b, unless reopened voluntarily by Party A. In other words, he wasn't legally required to answer her. About anything. She felt the weight of that collapse deep in her stomach. Not like a punch. Like a sinking. Like drowning in air. This wasn't abandonment. It was a mirror. And all it reflected was her silence. Her failure to respond, to ask, to notice. And now it was signed, sealed, filed, executed. She had nothing left to contest. She tried to stand up, but her legs wobbled. She braced against the desk, staring at the reflection of herself in the black screen. Not a victim, not a widow, not even a villain, just irrelevant. She'd wanted to be the center of everything. And now she wasn't even in the footnotes. The invitation wasn't even hers. It came through one of her socialite friends, one of those women who smile with their teeth but not their eyes. A gala fundraiser for some community revitalization project. Something about education, job programs, startup seed funding. Melissa didn't care. She needed to be seen. The last few months had been a PR vacuum. Her posts weren't landing, her boutique rebrand had moved on without her, and her phone, once a constant hum of group chats and invitations, had gone disturbingly quiet. She wore the red dress. The one he always said looked like she didn't have to try too hard. She used to laugh when he said that. Back then, she mistook it for laziness. Now, it felt like a warning she never understood. The ballroom was marble and mirror. All white wine smiles and rented tuxedos. She mingled with the other guests, plastering on charm, laughing at all the wrong things. She needed the attention. She craved the proof that she still mattered. Then came the moment. Someone tapped a crystal glass with a spoon. The microphone buzzed. A middle-aged woman with a clipboard stepped onto the platform. Tonight, we're proud to honor someone whose story represents everything this foundation stands for. Quiet resilience, intentional rebuilding, and the kind of leadership that doesn't require a spotlight. Melissa sipped her drink, bored. Our guest of honor tonight is a man who, after enduring a deeply personal loss, invested not only in his own healing, but in dozens of new beginnings, for small businesses, for displaced workers, and for first-time founders. Melissa froze. The crowd began to applaud. He prefers to remain behind the scenes, but tonight we convinced him to let us acknowledge his work. Please welcome our anonymous benefactor, Mr. Carter Ray. She choked. No. He walked out slowly, calmly, wearing a midnight blue suit she didn't recognize. Tailored, elegant, effortless. His hair was shorter, face leaner, movements more precise. He didn't smile for the crowd, just nodded once. A silent storm wrapped in stillness. Every flashbulb in the room felt like a punch to her lungs. He's here? He hadn't been seen publicly in almost a year. No one in her circle knew where he'd gone. She thought maybe he'd moved states. Maybe joined some silent cult of emotionally stunted men playing with spreadsheets in basements. She never imagined this. The MC led him through the room toward the head table. Along the way, people clapped him on the shoulder, whispered thank yous. A couple of young men beamed at him like disciples meeting their rabbi. Melissa's fingers tightened around her wine glass until the stem creaked. She moved fast, smooth like a woman used to skipping lines. She met him halfway to the table. Carter. He stopped, slowly turned. Their eyes met. His didn't flinch. She stared at him, barely recognizing the man behind that calm gaze. It wasn't rage. It wasn't smugness. It was worse. Indifference. You left me nothing, she hissed under her breath, teeth barely apart. He tilted his head slightly, not in confusion, in recollection. Then he said, flatly, you said no one would notice. Her breath caught. The words hit her like cold steel. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a timestamp. She opened her mouth again, but the words tangled. Her voice faltered. He didn't wait. He turned, nodding politely to someone nearby, then walked to the table without looking back. She stood there, alone, center of the room and center of nothing. The people closest had heard. A few had watched. One woman leaned over and whispered something to her husband. Another quietly stepped back from their conversation. She was supposed to be the one people orbited. Now the circle had shifted, and she wasn't even in its gravity. The next morning was foggy. Her lawyer called before 8 a.m. Michael, who now sounded like a man trying to put out a fire with an eyedropper. Breathless, voice tight, like he hadn't slept either. She's begging, he said. Melissa. She hasn't stopped calling. Left 6 voicemails since midnight. I don't know what happened at that event, but she's unraveling. She says she didn't understand. That she didn't mean what she said. On the other end of the line, Carter Ray sat in a dark navy chair, one leg crossed, calm as a statue. He didn't pace, didn't sigh, just stared out the window of his new office. I see, he said. Michael hesitated. She wants to talk. One conversation. That's all. Carter waited a beat, 2, then leaned forward and said, evenly, tell her I agree with her now. I'm sorry, what? He repeated, slower. Tell her I agree. No one should notice. Michael was silent. Not out of confusion. Out of understanding. Then Carter hung up. No drama. No fight. Just the soft click of a door shutting forever. Outside the window, the fog began to lift, revealing the project he had spent the last year building from the ground up. It wasn't flashy, no glass towers or monuments to ego. It was something cleaner, simpler. Concrete foundations being poured on land once tangled in legal drama. Affordable spaces for first-time business owners. Financial incubators. A partnership network with the very firm that had funded his initial buyouts. The signage hadn't gone up yet, but it was already approved. And her name? Nowhere. He reached for a folder marked Phase 2 Expansion and flipped it open. Inside, blueprints. Names of advisors. Consultants. Every one of them handpicked. Trusted. Earned. People who had noticed. Behind him, a photo sat on the shelf. Not a wedding picture. Not some nostalgia trip. Just a quiet snapshot taken at a backyard fire pit last fall. Him surrounded by the people she once dismissed. Laughing. Plotting. Rebuilding. Not bitter. Not broken. Just done. In a different part of the city, Melissa sat on the edge of her bed in that too-quiet house, gripping her phone like it might still ring, waiting for a message, a sign, a loophole. It didn't come, because the truth was no longer something she could argue with, negotiate, or reverse. It had already been signed, stamped, poured into foundation,